All right, this lesson is on adding integers. And as you can see from our essential question, it says how can you use a number line or a rule to add integers? So we're going to explore kind of two different methods on adding integers. Hopefully one of them really kind of sinks in with you and makes you feel comfortable with adding integers. So the first is using a number line. So let me give you an example problem here. Say we had the problem -7 plus +5. The first number tells you where to start on your number line. So in this case, I'm starting at -7. The second number tells you how many places to move from your starting point. So how many kind of steps we want to go. The key is the direction that you go on your number line. Depending on whether you're adding a positive or negative number, that's going to change what direction you head on your number line. So if you're adding a positive integer, you're going to move to the right. And think about all the problems you've done ever since first or second grade. 2 plus 3, adding 3 goes up to +5. We're used to moving to the right on our number line when we add. So in this case, if I'm adding 5, I'm going to move up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots, and I end up with an answer of -2. If I'm adding a negative integer, I'm going to move to the left. Okay? So let's say we had the problem 3 plus -8. And you'll see sometimes the -8 is written in parentheses. It's really just kind of a fancy way of writing it so you know that the negative and the 8 go together. It really doesn't mean like you're doing something out of order, or it's not like parentheses in order operations where that number has to go first. It's really just so you know that the negative and the integer go together. So let's see how this one would look on our number line. First number tells me where to start, 3, and I'm adding a -8. So my rule says if I'm adding a negative integer, I'm going to move to the left on my number line. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I end up at a -5. So 3 plus -8 is equal to -5. I started at 3, but when I went down by 8, or I lost 8, and that took me down to a -5. So let's try a couple more here. This one is 8 plus -5. So I'm going to start at 8. First number tells me where to start, and I'm adding a negative number. So my rule is if I'm adding a negative, I'm going to move to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots, and I get an answer of 3. Next one, -2 plus -7. Again, first number tells me where to start. Again, I'm adding a negative number, so I want to move to the left. So kind of think of what way would I go if I was adding 7? A negative means I want to go in the opposite direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I end up at -9. Even with 3 numbers, still follow the same steps. We're just going to kind of follow along. The first number tells me where to start. So I'm going to start at +4. First, I want to add a -9. Since I'm adding a negative number, I want to go down 9 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that took me to a -5. But then I want to add another -3. So I'm going to go down 3 more. 1, 2, 3. And I end up at a -8. So each time I add another number, I just continue from wherever I am on my number line. Now, sometimes the number line doesn't work. Sometimes the numbers are just too big, or we don't always have a number line available, and we want to be able to attack these problems in a different way, or at least have a different set of tools that we can go back to. So one way is using a set of counters or using a rule. So I want to do a couple of examples down here, and then we're going to go back and fill in our rule. So using counters, or sometimes you can just draw it out, it's basically just a visual. I always think of it as the positives versus the negatives. They're kind of battling it out. So in this first one, the negative team has 7 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The positive team has 3 positives. So imagine these teams battling it out. One person on one team versus one person on the other. So this positive and negative are going to kind of pair up and kind of cancel each other out. They're going to take each other out. Then these are going to take each other out, and these are going to take each other out. And I'm left with 4 negatives. So my answer is -4. The negatives had more players on their team. Here, I've got 8 plus -6. So I've got 8 positives, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 6 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So hopefully you can already see that clearly the positives have more players. If I were to kind of pair them up, you would see that each of the positives can take out one of the negatives, and I still have 2 positives left over. So my answer in this case would be +2. You'll notice in each of these cases, when I added them together, the number that was bigger, the side that I had more of, ended up being the winning team. In this case, I had 2 positives left because 8 was bigger. Let's see what happens when we're doing negatives. So I got 9 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I got 5 more negatives. Now, stop and think. Is a negative going to take out a negative? Well, no. They're playing for the same team. So in this case, I had 9 people on one team, and then I had 5 more people on that same team. Wouldn't I just combine those together? So in this case, I would get a -14. I have 14 negatives altogether. That idea is how we came up with our rules up top. So think of this last example. We're adding them together when they're both on the same team. They're both playing with the same sign. When that's the case, you just keep the sign. They're still playing for the negatives, and we just added them together. So same signs, we add them together, and we keep the sign because they're basically playing for the same team. It's just a bigger team than we had before. Here's where it's a little trickier when you're adding 2 numbers with different signs. So that's each of my first 2. There's always 2 steps to the problem. What's the sign of my answer going to be, and what's the number going to be? So to decide the sign, we're going to take the sign of the bigger number. Notice here the 7 was bigger, so it stayed negative. Here the 8 was bigger and it was positive, so our answer stayed positive. So we take the sign of the bigger number. And when we say bigger number, we're really just looking at the size of the number, not really where it would fall on a number line. I know that a -7 is lower than a +3. I know that. So we're really just looking at the absolute value of the number, 3 and 7. 7's bigger, so we're going to take that sign. And then think about what we did with a 7 and a 3. Didn't we just subtract them to get our 4? And is an 8 minus 6 our 2? So when we were drawing out our model, so we could see each of those totals, what we were really doing is finding the difference between the 2 numbers. How many more did one have than the other, which is really just a subtraction problem. All right, so let's do just a couple more. I'm going to kind of talk you through them. We had a goofy song in class. I know it was a little creepy, but here were kind of the words, and it kind of sums up the rules we just came up with. If they have the same signs, you add them together and keep the sign. If they have different signs, so they're battling against each other, they're playing for different teams, we're going to subtract. We're going to find out how much bigger is one than the other. And we always take the sign of the higher number, which team is going to win. So here, -8 plus 11. They have different signs. One's positive, one's negative. So take the sign of the bigger number. Well, 11 is bigger than 8, so I know I'm going to be positive. And then subtract. 11 minus 8 is 3. So my answer is +3. The positives had 3 more than the negatives did. All right, -6 plus +4. Again, different signs, so take the sign of the bigger number. 6 is bigger than 4, so I'm going to take the negative, and then I subtract. 6 minus 4 is 2. Next one, a -12 plus a -13. These have the same signs. They're playing for the same team. So same signs, add them together, and keep the signs. So 12 plus 13 is 23. Since they're both negatives, it stays negative. We just have more negatives because we combine them together. So same thing down here. Same signs, 5 plus 8. So we've known this since 2nd or 3rd grade. 5 plus 8 is 13. We never thought about changing the sign because they were both positive, so we just combined them together and made them more positive. Next one. Don't be thrown off by larger problems or longer problems. You follow the exact same rules. Just start with the first 2, -7 and 9. They have different signs, so we're going to take the sign of the bigger number. 9 is bigger, so we know our answer is going to be positive. And then we subtract. 9 minus 7 is 2. Then we add our negative 6. Again, they have different signs, so they're kind of battling it out. We want to see which team is going to win. The negatives are going to win because 6 is bigger. 6 minus 2 is 4. The negatives have 4 more negatives than there are positives. So even with the bigger numbers, clearly this one wouldn't work on a number line. We wouldn't want to try it, but our rules help us out. They have different signs, so we know we're going to subtract, and we're going to take the sign of the bigger number. In this case, 63 is bigger than 35, so I know it's going to be positive. And then I can just do a little subtraction off to the side. And I get 28. So my answer is going to be a positive 28. So always think of it as a two-part problem. What's the sign of my answer going to be? And then what's the answer going to, the actual number going to be itself?